Hi, and welcome to Sampling with Kontakt. Let me begin by saying that Kontakt has a lot of features, not all of which we're going to cover in this series. If you're interested in some of the more advanced topics, I recommend checking out the manual. It's really well written and doesn't assume a lot of prior knowledge. With that said, let's have a look at the setup of Kontakt. In the Audio tab, you can set your audio output. This is only relevant when you're working with Kontakt in standalone mode. In the MIDI tab, you can tell Kontakt which MIDI devices it should receive data from. If you switch between different machines or external monitors, Kontakt sometimes needs to be resized. That's what the reset size button is for. With F1 through to F4, you can show and hide the browser, mixer, piano roll, and master sections. The mixer is where you can set the amount of outputs Kontakt should have. This is especially useful when you're working with Kontakt as a plugin, because it allows you to use one instance of Kontakt for several instruments, which can then be routed to several tracks in your DAW for recording or mixing. The process is slightly different for each DAW, but let me show you how it works in Ableton. First, load Kontakt into a track. Let's create 3 new tracks and name them. I'm going to be using a violin, viola, and a cello. Now set the track's inputs to Kontakt and the input monitoring option to in. Let's go back into Kontakt and we can delete the 5.1 surround channel and add 2 additional output channels. This menu might look a bit confusing, but just count the outputs. So 1, 2, 3, and 4 are already used. So let's select that. And you can see that Kontakt created the right output channels for us. I'm going to use the violin, viola, and cello from the Kontakt factory library. I can now set the outputs of each instrument individually. I'll route the violin to 3 and 4, the viola to 5 and 6, and the cello to 7 and 8. Notice that by default, each instrument gets its own MIDI channel. This means that if you wanted to, you could create additional MIDI tracks, send their MIDI to Kontakt, each on a different channel, and thus trigger each instrument separately. But for now, let's set the channels in Ableton. So the violin is channel 3 and 4, the viola 5 and 6, and the cello 7 and 8. If I now play a note, you can see that it is indeed being routed to the violin's channel. Let's switch back to standalone mode now. You can create a new instrument by double-clicking inside the grey box. We can change the panning and volume with these sliders. You can return any slider or dial to its default value by holding Command and clicking on it. Pressing the wrench icon up in the top left opens the interface. It may look confusing at first, but it's not as bad as it looks. You can think of Kontakt as having different levels, each of which is useful for different things. The sample level is where you change the behavior of individual samples. The mapping editor and wave editor operate at sample level. The group level is where you change the behavior of groups of samples and assign effects to groups. At instrument level, which is this section down here, you affect the entire instrument. This is for modulation and effects. The script editor up here is one of the more powerful features of Kontakt. Kontakt has its own scripting language called KSP, which works at sample, group, and instrument level. Scripting can be used to create custom interfaces and to program complex behaviors. You can add up to 5 different scripts to an instrument. Scripting in Kontakt is fairly straightforward, so if you have any coding experience, you shouldn't find it too difficult. We won't go into scripting in this series, but if you're interested in it, there's some links to tutorials down below. One thing that needs to be mentioned is that the script editor within Kontakt isn't particularly user-friendly. There's no color coding, automatic indenting, or autofill feature, which makes it difficult to navigate complex scripts, and especially if you're a beginner. Luckily, a very nice person called Niels Leiberg created a free plugin for the text editor Sublime, which adds all those functions. If you want to get into scripting, I highly recommend getting it. I'll link to it below. The KSP reference manual contains all the commands that you can use within Kontakt, and the Forums on Native Instruments website and the KVR forums are excellent resources if you have questions about scripting. The community is very active and really helpful. Over the course of the next videos, we'll have a closer look at the different levels and what you can do with them. That's it for now. Hope you found it useful.